everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking all about glazes. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about all the glazes that I like to use for my personal work, and just kind of a lot of things that I wish that someone had told me when I first started using these, instead of going through just a lot of experiments and not liking a lot of things. So I'm gonna be kind of rating these guys as well to let you guys know just my thoughts on them, and I hope it's helpful for you. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one that we're gonna be talking about is Stroke and Coat. So it's by Mako. You're gonna find these in just about every single paint your own pottery place. They are basically the easiest things to use, which is why you're gonna find them the most often. If you are a beginner and you like painting, surface decoration, things like that, I would highly recommend these. A couple of different things though. So they fire from cone 06 to 6, so they can do low or mid fire. When they get fired to mid fire, they do end up kind of losing a little bit of saturation, so I do always recommend doing a test tile. However, there's a lot of resources online that if you just look it up, you should be able to find different test tiles and things like that for what it looks like in each different cone. And so would recommend looking that up before trying it out. Another thing about these guys is that where you put them is where they're gonna stay. So if you are a painter and you want to do a lot of like surface design on your pottery, where you put them is where they're going to stay. I did a couple series of these strawberry planters, and you can see that like where the strawberry and the leaf end up meeting, they don't end up running into each other. So if you're having trouble with a lot of your glazes kind of meshing when they end up getting fired, you do want to use the Stroke and Coats because they won't do that to you. So they're pretty true to everything on that. They always say apply 1 to 3 coats. I would highly recommend 3 coats every time. They will end up being a little bit more opaque. So this is the candy apple red, which is exactly what I used on this strawberry, and the sour apple green. And if you want like a lighter color, I would not recommend doing like 1 or 2 coats, because in theory, right, if you do 1 or 2 coats as opposed to 3, it'll turn out lighter. Wrong. It's gonna turn out streaky. The nice thing about these is they mix just like acrylic paint. So if you want something a little bit lighter, I suggest, you know, mixing your red with a little bit of white to get a lighter red, or kind of like a more pinkish. They do have a very wide variety though of different shades that they offer, so I would try and get as close as you can to whatever it is in the bottle that you get, and then mixing based on that. One thing to also think about is if you're trying to go darker, try to mix with brown rather than black. Black tends to take over, but if you do choose to do black, I would recommend adding much less black than you'd think you'd need. It will end up turning a lot faster. They also say that you can end up applying this to greenware as well. If you end up doing that in the greenware, I've noticed it pinholes a lot, and if you're not sure what that is, it literally is exactly how it sounds. It'll leave little marks that are basically just like a pinhole all the way down to your clay body. And if you're doing this in low fire and it's something that's gonna hold food or something to drink, would not recommend it. That is Mako Stroke and Coats for you. Next into the ring, we have Duncan matte glazes. I really love these ones. These are really great if you are somebody who really enjoys different textures, you want something a little bit softer. These end up being super soft. However, same thing as the Stroke and Coats. If you don't do 3 coats, it's gonna be streaky. I do have an example of that here. Made this little mushroom house, but you can see the back of it is kind of a bit streaky. I would recommend doing 3 coats, and when it is something that says 3 coats, please wait for the first coat to dry before you add the second coat. If you just end up applying them all 3 while they're all wet, you're just gonna mix around the same glaze over and over. So make sure it dries, then add the next one. The thing about these is I almost would recommend 4 coats of glaze. 3 to 4 is really good. They do have these in low fire and in mid fire. Stroke and Coats have a range, so it could be the same glaze going to low or the high. Please make sure that whichever bottle you end up getting, you know if it belongs in the low fire or if it belongs in the mid fire, because it's not a range. If you put the low fire in the high fire, it's gonna melt and it's gonna ruin everything, including your kiln shelf. So know your glazes. Always do test tiles, I recommend, always. And that is the matte glazes. 10 out of 10 would always recommend. Next up, we have Mako's Jungle Gems. You're also gonna find these a lot in big square paint your own pottery places, mainly because they are also very easy to use. You can see in these guys though that they actually have chunks of glass kind of in them, so you can see those like little speckles. So they're gonna paint kind of chunky. They also recommend 3 coats. However, you can definitely get away with 2 on these, or even just 1 if you just want to add like a little bit of a pop of color in there. These are really, they can can be used by themselves, they can be used in layering. As far as layering goes, this is the herb garden. You'll notice that some of them have a colored base, and by that I mean like the base of the glaze is one color and then the crystals are a different color. Some of them are clear, like this one. So herb garden is clear and it's got green speckles. So I do make a lot of like whimsical type art, so like fairy houses, but if you can see the moss in here just kind of sitting in there, that is actually the herb garden over this brown that I used. So what ended up happening was, you know, the clear doesn't ruin everything I have on there, but it adds just a little bit extra. It is not recommended for dinnerware use due to texture surfaces. Sometimes it turns out completely fine, smooth. You'd be wondering, why is this not dinnerware safe? And other times it'll leave little, you know, like spiky shards of glass, not like full glass pieces, but like it'll leave texture there. And sometimes if that's, you know, something that's gonna be like on a plate, you don't want to pick that up with your food. It's not toxic, but would not recommend. So if you're gonna do it with dinnerware pieces, don't do it on the inside, just the outside, and then it's totally safe. So another fun thing to do too is between the Jungle Gems and the Dunkin' Matte Glazes, you can get a really cool contrast of colors if you end up layering those together. So they also run a little bit more, so you can see I definitely didn't make this drip as much as it did, but it ran a little bit. But the contrast can be really nice, so if you are somebody who is striving to get that, I would highly recommend. Jungle Gems don't typically run like this over like a stroking coat or something a little bit more stable, so, but over the matte glazes I found it does some really fun things. There is that. Next up, we are going to be going over my personal favorite, Potter's Choice glazes. These are all cone 5/6. I would highly recommend these always to anyone who is, you know, using store-bought glazes for their mid-fire pottery. These are all like paint on glazes. They're really nice. You can find a lot of test tiles on Pinterest and on their website, really, of just what they look like by themselves and what they look like layered with other things. The thing about these, you can get away with about 2 coats of these. I never recommend for any paint on glazes trying to just do 1 coat. It just doesn't really work out well. And if you're somebody like me who likes a lot of color, likes a lot of different variations in your pots, I would always recommend doing 2 coats, if not 3. With these, especially if you're doing multiple of these like on top of each other, the one thing that I wish that someone had told me beforehand is the fact that, first off, they don't move. Where you put them is where they're going to stay, kind of like the stroking coat. So because with low fire, you can stilt things a little bit better without things running onto it. But with high fire, a lot of the times either your clay will warp because of the temperature and it being lifted by something so small, or your glaze will end up running onto the stilt or onto the shelf because it ends up moving. These guys are very good at drawing the line, and this is where it stays. I have an example here. This is actually that exact texture turquoise underneath it. And then I put their sapphire float on top. So you get some really nice color variations in there. The thing about layering these is you want to do 3 coats of each, and it's gonna seem like a lot before it's glazed, or like before it's actually been fired. Mainly because you're gonna do 3 coats of this, 3 coats of that. And most of the time, if you're looking for something that really runs like this, which is typically what I go for, I do also have another example here. You are going to want to do 6 coats essentially where they overlap. And a lot of the times it's gonna start to crack when it dries. Don't worry about it. A lot of glazes, typically when they start to crack, that's like a red flag. Like you wipe some of that off. But with these, go ahead, leave them, they'll be fine. They're not gonna move. They're just gonna kind of run into each other a little bit more. Oddly enough, if you do like 3 coats of the bottom one and 2 coats of the top, it really doesn't do a whole lot. So I always recommend doing 3 and 3. So 6 coats on the things that end up going over. And if you're wondering what this color combo is, it is their Chun Plum with their blue rutile over it. But you can get so many good color combinations. Here's another one. It's the Iron Luster with the sapphire float over it. But I like them. I think they are my favorite. And then lastly, Amico also does a bunch of Celadon glazes. So these guys can be really nice, especially if you like a nice clean finish. You do something with a lot of texture, but you don't want a ton of color on it. You want something that just kind of settles into the cracks and accentuates what details you've already put into your pot. These guys can be great. It literally looks just kind of like how it is on the picture here. So I would always recommend these. They also stay put, so they don't run a ton. They can be really nice. So Mako also makes what they call fluxes. So it kind of helps the movement of the glaze a little bit more. They make dark flux and light flux. You can see on here, but essentially sometimes it'll change the glaze chemistry and change the color a little bit, but it really helps kind of move the color and help it break into different things. So if you end up having something that's a little bit simpler and you just want like a touch of color but you're not really sure what to do, I always add like a little layer of Flux on top of it. 2 to 3 coats for this too. These guys turn out different with everything. This is really going to be a tester, so again, test tile your pieces always before you end up ruining some like masterpiece that you've been working on for the last couple weeks. So Fluxes are another one that I really enjoy. Last but not least, today we're gonna go over Mako's stoneware glazes. I really like these a lot. They do also tend to hold and they don't end up running a ton. I use a lot of these. These ones, you really can get away with 2 coats. I'd say 2 coats is just enough to get the color that you want. However, most of these are designed to break in different colors. And by break, I mean like where things will have edges if you have designs. And if you'll notice, kind of like on this cup, right? You'll see that the top of this kind of breaks a different color here. That little change over the edges is what I'm talking about. So the thing about with these stoneware glazes, a lot of the times is they will break over the edges. So if you have something that, you know, you can kind of see how this one's like a light purple, but you see in here where that kind of starts to settle into that design, it'll end up turning into more of like a bluish purple. And so instead of going from like a lilac, it'll go a little bit deeper in that. So if you like the color that it breaks to, I would suggest doing 3 coats because you'll get more of that than you would with the 2, but the 2 is enough to get the nice color on there and it's not gonna look streaky. So this is what 2 coats looks like. You can kind of see it's got some brown. It may have gotten a little bit thicker, and this is what I mean by breaking. It kind of got a little bit deeper here. I do have this platter, however, that I did 3 coats on, just about all of it. You can see where it settled, especially in this fern. It got quite a bit deeper. So if you're looking for a little bit more of that like cloudy, whatever color you end up going for, I would highly suggest doing 3 colors if you end up liking what it breaks to rather than what it is just with 2 coats. That's just kind of the difference there. Yeah, so there you guys have it. That is kind of a basic breakdown of all of the glazes that I like to use and just some tips and tricks on each one of them. If you do have any comments or another glaze that you're curious about but wasn't in the video, go ahead and drop a comment and I'll see if you know, it's something that I have any sort of experience or knowledge about, and hopefully I can help you guys. But I hope that that was helpful for you, and if you like this video, go ahead and hit like, comment, share. But if not, I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.